It's unbelievable to say, but 7 months ago I started work on my Incision lore project. The final supercut video has become my most popular video by far, and the amount of support I've received was humbling in a way I've never experienced. I'm extremely grateful for this, and I was intending for that video to be the end. However, since then, I've had a few sleepless nights, resulting in me booting up Incision again for another whirl. This time, looking at the game through a different lens, I was surprised to find a lot of details I've missed. None of them are anything that completely transforms the framing of the narrative, but they're interesting enough, as is their number, that I've decided to compile them into another video. I hope this intro wasn't too long. Let's now get into the list. I will start off with probably the most critical omission, right in the first level, Hole in the Sky. Turns out there's actually a lore bit in this cage near the end of the level, and I honestly feel kind of justified in having missed it, because it is very hard to see and trigger. There's a bunch of corpses inside on top of this sick orange RGB setup. It reads, "The atmosphere begins breaking them down, their flesh melting into the fabric of these facilities, forming new spaces for the growth's machinery." Of course, this isn't new information. However, the sight of bodies on top of these orange heater-looking things is very common in many Rust Organs style levels. I've omitted mentioning them because I couldn't say anything about them that you couldn't see with your own eyes. That being said, now we know this is actually part of the growth's methods of assimilating biomatter for its own needs. In E1M2, Rust Organs, first, but in many other levels too, we find these barrels. It turns out, inside them are actually clinkers. I somehow didn't notice this when looking at them initially, maybe because of their unusual positions. It shows us that this enemy type is probably the most mass-produced of the entire lot. I wonder if this also implies their method of manufacture is more mechanical than it is biological, like with the Rustborn. Next up, in the first boss level of the game, Feral Armament, there is a big empty space lined with growth behind some bars that I haven't paid attention to so far. Now, I've noticed there's actually 2 giant arms protruding upwards, along with an abnormally large maw of the maw. The first, I'm not sure how to interpret, honestly. However, I have since noticed a lot more of these giant humanoid organs and body parts in the game, which makes the huge arm in the Malikant's waste pool feel less special, and I now lean towards believing it doesn't represent anything particular. As for the latter, there is very little information to go off of, but I don't think it's a coincidence. This is the first level we meet the Mauls. I wonder if this is the original plasma weapon prototype that Growth has consumed to now replicate among its own numbers. E1M4, the Filth Pit, starts off with a pile of dead sycophants, and similarly to the giant hands, I've noticed a lot more of these throughout the game, making it seem like less of the landmark I originally thought. There's also this one part where a strangely shaped wall opens up to reveal a bunch of Rustborn. I had this feeling back then too, and I got the same vibe now, but I couldn't really back it up with anything particular. This kind of looks as if the enemies were being manufactured or held in stasis inside of these pod-looking things, and they've been released upon us. This holds little water, as the texture on the wall is very generic, so it's probably not meant to be anything special. But I just can't shake this feeling every time I play through this section. It would lend credence to my interpretation that this level is a spawning grounds. On this playthrough, I've played each level from the level select menu, as opposed to doing them continuously. This effectively works like a pistol start in Doom, making the level flow a bit differently than normal. I found it to be very well balanced, and almost all levels were giving me appropriate challenges for the weapons I presently held. It changes very little in the actual levels, as many weapons are already placed there. It does, for example, add additional kitty spawns, such that you can still get and use her more often than the mere 3 levels you'd normally find her in. However, in E1M6, Death Cult Vestiges, there is one strange weapon spawn I found. There is a jawbreaker here, inside of this secret area, near the end of the level, that I'm dead certain is not in the normal version. It makes zero sense to be here, so it's probably a mistake, but I still found it an interesting detail. In E2M1 Harvest Vivarium, I found yet another Easter egg to something flying right over my head, which you're probably not surprised about. Definitely of zero plot relevance, but I still thought I'd mention it. In my original video, I said that the dead old mind, brought up by the pilot, most likely is not the throne's firstborn, because I couldn't see how the growth the spaceship is made of could have reached such a chaotic form in such a short time span. However, now I'm starting to lean a bit more towards suspecting this might be the same entity after all. Firstly, it makes narrative sense, in that there's nothing else it could be that we know of. The firstborn was also called a hive mind, which is probably intended to draw this connection in the minds of the audience. When we also take into account that the time span between the two episodes could have been longer than I originally thought, and the time for Growth's invasion of Red Rock shorter, it suddenly doesn't seem so implausible. 6 months was the amount of time between the opening cutscene and Healer's escape from the flesh cocoon, not necessarily for the complete invasion. Remember that, in the meantime, there was also a martial law, and citizens being in the dark as to what is happening. The physical transformation part might be fairly fast, for all we know, and maybe could have taken place between the end of episode 1 and the point we reach the inside of the spaceship. In E2 Boss 1, I have now realized that the laser destroying the platforms after the first fight is actually the Death Rothschild using the same laser attack from Phase 2. Nothing particularly significant, but it is a cool detail I failed to notice and mention. The cloning facility in E3M1, Thy Cherished Flesh, is located right above the furnace pit Healer was supposed to burn in. I noticed this earlier, but I failed to draw the connection. Now it seems obvious that our dead body and or soul would be used in this process. This yellow bit looks very similar to the machine that was seemingly siphoning a person's mind into a tumor back in E1M2, so the same process was probably supposed to take place here. E3M2 Oblivion Threshold is a very interesting level for many reasons. For one, it's the last time we find Malikant and their twisted machines, which reverse a chunk of their harvest vessel that's crash landed here, and see what remains of the vivarium pipes from E2M1. They were used to transport liquefied growth, but now they're leaking corpses instead. It might be a stretch, but to me, the implication seems to be that these tracts have been co-opted by Growth, probably to funnel biomass towards the gestating alchemical miracle. Finally, in E3M3, Death's Storm Havoc, I've noticed that the original rust organs, formerly full of clinker barrels, are now full of corpses instead. This probably doesn't mean anything, but it does give me an impression of a place that's been thoroughly ransacked of anything useful and subsequently abandoned. There's clinker barrels in the earlier parts of the level, actually, outside of the flesh cocoon. I've also noticed that the bottom of the blood pit is lined with a texture of sycophants. I'm not even really convinced this is intentional because it looks very strange. And that's about it. By now I feel like I've had my fill of Incision. I might return to it someday, but I'm not intending to play it casually anymore. I've received a lot of comments with your own theories and suggestions, so if you have something you'd like me to respond to, leave a comment, and I might make one last video assessing them, if there is enough. Thank you so much for your support over this journey. The complete supercut has single-handedly catapulted my channel most of the way to getting monetized, which is my current target. I'm working on a few different projects at once, and one of them is another massive lore analysis for another game, but it's got so much content that it's going to be a while before I even start writing the script. so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, I hope you liked the video. If you do, I would really appreciate if you hit like and subscribe. I want to get monetized, which would help me spend more time and effort making these videos. So if you want to see that, you know what to do. Thank you, bye bye.